Hey there everybody and welcome back to another Blender tutorial. I would say it's a beautiful day to be recording and on your end listening to this tutorial, but no, it's overcast, it's cold, the view outside my window just kind of looks like shit, but that's just because of the apartment that I'm renting. That has nothing to do with the weather. But you might also ask, does weather have anything to do with Blender tutorials? And the answer would be no. Either way, as you can see from the render, in this one we're going to be doing soft body simulation. That's actually the main thing in this tutorial. How do you simulate this without it being super slow? Because usually soft body, you can't calculate these tubes and all that. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're also going to turn it into peach rings, which is a candy I used to eat all the time. Before we start, just a quick thing. As I mentioned, we're going to be using a kind of a cute little trick to be able to simulate this using soft body, because normally you wouldn't. We're going to be using geometry nodes and all this. This is an idea I stumbled across on Reddit, and the original poster is a guy called Morian Ohnheiser. I'm not good with names. I'm good at a lot of things, and names aren't one of them. So I asked this person if I have their blessing to, marry their daughter. And by that, I mean record this tutorial. They said yes. They just said pimp out my stuff. So here's the name. And there's going to be a link in the description for this person's website. If you are looking for freelance, that, contact this person. Cool ideas, clearly. So how are we going to, bake this cookie? It's a good question. So normally the way we do this is we'd make a bunch of tubes, run a soft body, but again, for the last time, it would take forever. So here is the workaround. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a plane. By the way, Blender 3.1, all of this works in 3.0. Don't worry. Wipe that sweat off your forehead. It's fine. So I'm going to start off with a plane. This is going to be our floor, our collision. And then for the tubes, we're going to do something a little weird. Instead of adding in a bunch of toruses and being like, here's one, here's another, and we're going to soft body all of these, what I'm going to do instead is we're going to add in a circle. Very weird. Even weirder is I'm going to take this circle and bring down the divisions by a lot. So let's say we have 10 vertices. So it's a... Is it a decagon? Is that what we call this with 10 sides? Either way, this is going to be our very low resolution approximation of a tube. And it's actually going to be in geometry nodes that we're going to give it thickness. But we're actually just going to simulate this very basic mesh, which is going to make it a lot faster. And that's kind of the key idea here. So I'm going to take this in edit mode. I'm just going to start duplicating it. So Shift D, Shift D, Shift D, A to select everything. So we're speeding it up. Another Shift D, Shift D. And then let's start with that. So we have a bunch of rings that are each to represent a tube, and can we simulate them? So let's see. Physics tab, we're going to make this a soft body object, and we're going to disable goal so they don't hover. And if we play this, indeed they do fall through the floor, but they fall. The floor, you want it to be a collision object, and now they are going to stockpile. Well, they definitely land on the floor, but they definitely also self-intersect. So next thing we need to do, we're actually almost done with this. Enable self-collision. This is going to make it so that each tube is kind of its own entity. So let's see. And you can see they stack and they interact. And kind of the key insight that Morian had, it seems, is that it's almost like they have a buffer between them, like there's gaps of air. And this is actually going to be the thickness of our tube, and we can control this. So if I go to self-collision, there's a thing called ball size, which, is the size of your balls. But what it means in this case is each of these points of the rings has a imaginary sphere with some distance that is going to be collided with. So you have to imagine there's a bunch of spheres. The bigger this number, the bigger the buffer. So if I set this to 1, now you can see there's a big gap in between them. So they're kind of bigger tubes. So you just kind of want to pick something that fits the size that you'd want. So I'm going to say 0.65 seems fine. The second thing I want to do is, now that I'm happy with the gaps, I want to make sure that I like my simulations. I want to make sure they're as bouncy as I want them to be. They fold as much as I want. And that's going to be controlled, I believe, by the stiffness is a big thing. So if I increase the stiffness, we get kind of a different result than before. And the second thing is in edges. And this is kind of like the springiness of the edges. You can change its like resistance to bending. I'm going to add a bit of that. And maybe a bit of a push-pull resistance. Let's see what this looks like. I still want them to be bouncy because they're kind of gelatin. Okay, so I'm happy with this. At this point, you could at any point, you could just add in more of these. So I'm just going to select this. I'm going to Shift D, and now it's going to simulate as well. but you get the idea. Once you're happy with this, I'm just going to bake in this simulation. So just go to cache, hit bake. It's going to be pretty quick because, again, we're optimizing here in the sense that we're simulating these rings instead of tubes. And now is where the magic happens. And this is where Morian isn't just a mortal. He's a hero. Here's what we're going to do. In geometry nodes, we're going to apply a geonodes group. So yes, Softbody can be seen as a modifier. So this is our dynamics. And then we can apply a geometry nodes modifier. So they're kind of playing together. And what we can do is give this thing thickness. So in geometry nodes, we have group input to output. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this mesh. So it's an updating mesh, but it is a mesh. And I'm going to turn it into a curve. And you're thinking, why? And that's a good question. The reason I'm turning it into a curve is so that I can turn it back into a mesh. And now you think I'm crazy. But no, because when you turn it back into a mesh, we have this option of a profile curve. So if I set it to curve circle, now we can give this thing thickness. So that's why we went back and forth. So I'm going to bring down the radius. And I think it just so happens to be, I don't think it's exactly the ball size that what the radius has to be. I'm just going to eyeball it. Okay. But you can see the key insight here is these tubes look like, the physics looks like it makes sense, even though we didn't even simulate it, right? We simulated it on the rings that formed these things. Now, if I want these to look like candies, I want the circles to be a bit smaller, but again, that's not the focus of this tutorial. So now the second question you have is, oh, I should have added more vertices to the circle, no? Because they kind of look low resolution. And this is where my insight comes in. Morian didn't come up with this. This is all me. In geometry nodes, what we can do is before we turn it into a curve and into a mesh and all this, let's add in a subdivision surface. Boom. Instantly clean up, and we can actually add 2 levels. It instantly cleans up our tubes, but keeps the physics accurate. And we can actually have a procedural amount of resolution here. So you can see we have a low res version. We can have a high res version, whatever. So all of this detail is coming for free. And this is kind of the convenient case where this thing has a uniform thickness. Okay? So in terms of simulating tubes, that's how you do it. If now you want them to look like peach rings or, basically rings where we have one color on one side, one color on another, keep watching. Actually, I don't care what you want. Keep watching. I need that viewer retention. So here is how we do that part. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into rendered mode. We can stick with Eevee for now. And then when we want it to look presentable, we'll go to cycles. So I'm going to make a material. I'm going to call this one colors. And what we're going to do is, we do this curve to mesh, whatever. And now we are going to set our material inside geometry nodes. If you're familiar, this makes it so that our material is affected in this node group. Okay. And let's save. I'm going to call this Morian is great, but I have a Patreon. So there is a link to the Morian's website. Check it out. But also if you want blend files, etc., maybe not for this one because there's a simulation cache and all this. I'll think about it. Patreon, link in the description. Worth checking out. Hundreds of blend files. Either way, we want to color this not with one color, but with 2. So the question is, how do we do that? Well, I believe we could actually keep it pretty simple. Let's see. If this doesn't work, I have another idea. And by the way, you're like, how do you not know you've already done it? I used the other method, but it just occurred to me we can do this. So let's see. Texture coordinates. Maybe it won't work. Yeah, so I was going to say we can use object coordinates or generated coordinates, but you see they're kind of flowing through them because it's one mesh. Okay. Looks like we're going to have to come up with something clever, boys. Here's how we're going to do it. So in the beginning, we have this thing, we subdivide, we turn it into a curve. It's at this point that we basically have this curve circle, and we can extract information about how far we are along this curve. How am I going to do that? I'm going to capture an attribute. The attribute that describes this is something called spline parameter. If you're using 3.0, might be called curve parameter, but it's the same node. Take factor, connect it. What factor does is it gives a number between 0 and 1 as we go around the curve. So if I take this information, extract it, so I'm sending this attribute out. Why do we have 2 geometry nodes? Am I tripping? Sorry about that. It doesn't. We only needed 1. Either way, on our geonodes group, the only one we needed, apparently, we now have an attribute. I'm going to call this one colors, so that now in our material called colors, we can make an attribute called color. Basically, this name and this name have to match. It can be anything. It can be butthole, but both of them need to be buttholes. And now with this attribute, we can view it, and you can see, oh, now we have a kind of a coordinate system here. In fact, we want to separate it by halves, so I'm just going to say where is it greater than 0.5, and now we have a thing. And you can see it flows with the mesh, flows with it. One thing you might be interested in is how do we randomize it? They all kind of look the same. We can't really rotate the meshes because they're already simulated, so we somehow need to rotate the texture space. Well, this is pretty easy because we have a 0 to 1 gradient. If I just offset it and then do the greater than 0.5, that should work. So I'm going to add two math nodes. One of them is going to be add, one of them is going to be a fraction. How did I come up with this? Good question. Basically, we're going to be offsetting, we're going to be adding to our texture coordinates, and then to make sure it stays within 0 to 1, that's what fraction is for. So now we need a number, so you can see now if I add, it's basically a rotation. Now there is a bit of an artifact here, and this is kind of a spline parameter issue, it seems. The more subdivisions we have, the less this is an issue. But for now, just ignore that. There are ways to kind of go around this. But either way, you can see this is rotation. So now if we want to randomize our rotations, we somehow need to say, for each of these tubes, generate a different number. And it turns out in geometry, we have something called random per island, which is not working for some reason. I wonder if it's a cycles only thing. It seems to be a cycles only thing. Okay, you learn every day. Random per island is going to take each of our face islands, even though this is one mesh, there are separate components. And for each island, it's going to generate a number between 0 and 1, which we can connect here, which we can view here. And now you can see they're, randomly rotated. Again, we do have this issue right here with the thing. This can be remedied by our kind of coloring function. But again, I'm not going to get into that. You can just solve it by bumping up the divisions, and it won't be too expensive. But it is a shame. It's because the indexing starts at 0 or something. Either way, I wonder if that'd be easy to solve. Either way, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a very, very basic material. And again, all of this flows with the simulation. That's important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix RGB. Beautiful. Now we can have two colors. One of them should be red. One of them should be yellow. It's just a candy I used to eat all the time. Don't stress out about it. I can tell you were stressing. Take this. Make it high roughness since it's not very reflective. And then to add a bit of detail, like a bit of noise, a bit of normal information, I'm going to use a noise texture, which should also flow with this, I believe, yeah. Because our material is being applied after the simulation. It's kind of hard to wrap your brain around, so just don't. Make a high resolution noise, send it through a bump to turn it into a normal map. So this is just going to be extra detail. If I connect this here, you can see, whoa, extra lighting information. Kind of looks like a sponge, so turn it down. But extra information for free. At this point, it's probably good to make a very basic, and use GPU, dear Lord. Just do a very basic lighting setup. So I'm just speeding through the rest of this tutorial because I've taught the important part. The rest of this is just nonsense, really. But have I convinced you to keep watching? Whatever. So we have the colors. They're separated half and half. To make this look kind of edible and like candy, here's a couple tricks. Bring up the subsurface. This is going to make light pass through it and make it kind of a reddish, yellowish kind of color. So this is without subsurface, and this is with. So immediately more edible. Second thing we can do, and this is actually a geometry nodes thing, so it's actually very convenient for us. We can add some sugar crystals super easily, distribute on faces, because we're inside geometry nodes now. So if we view this point distribution, each of these tubes has salt crystals on it, and again, it moves with the simulation. It doesn't recalculate every frame, which is nice. So I'm going to add a bunch more salt crystals, and then to actually make them meshes that we can see, we're going to instance on each of these distributed points, we're going to instance a mesh. Which one? A cube, because it kind of looks like a sugar crystal, and it's a low res, which is nice. So bring down the size. This is a speed run, boys. We got to go faster. We got to randomize the scale and the rotation to make this look good. So for the scale, I'm going to say it could be between a scale of 0, so in other words, invisible, or, I don't know, 0.2 at most on XYZ axis. This is going to make it so that they're not all the same size, but also non-uniform scaling, because you could have a different X, Y, and Z scaling. Additionally, we could do the same thing for our rotation, so they're not all facing the same way. And we just randomize from, I mean, you could do negative pi to pi, but just pick a small number, and then for the bounds a big number. So now they're not all facing the same way. Okay, salt crystals. Take it, join it. And we want to do this in a way where one thing has one material and another has another. So I'm going to join it here so that now we can actually assign a second material to our salt crystals. So right now we only have one material. And I say salt, I mean sugar. I'm just so used to being salty, I suppose. For the sugar, we're just going to make a different material. So let's just principled BSDF this boy. And let's see what this looks like. So you can see now these are controlled by separate materials. So, you could have green sugar. I'm just going to make it transmissive and reflective. That will make it look correct in some sense. What I'm seeing, though, is that we need way more sugar crystals. So let's go up to 500. Okay. A bit more we can do with the gummy part of this. Again, we're not going to go too... You could try transmissiveness, but you're going to see it does some weird stuff. So here's what I recommend. Just to immediately get that gummy feeling, this is what not transparent, but what a translucent BSDF is for. So you can see, wow, it already looks gummy, especially if we kind of pick a color that matches this. So this already has the gummy vibe, and you're like, oh, why don't you just, connect this raw? It's because it gets fairly dark, and you could, bump up the brightness of the colors to fix that, but it's not perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix both of these so we kind of get best of both worlds. So you can either have it be translucent or BSDF. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix them relative to a view angle or a Fresnel. So just connect that there. View it. Do I want to flip these? I do. And you want to make sure that we can control the intensity of this with a color amp or something. So when I set the bottom handle, in other words, how strong is the translucency to 1, I guess it's the inverse. It's going to be not visible. At black, it's going to be quite visible. So I'm just going to pick something in between. And this will add quite a bit of gumminess to it. Okay. If anything, the main issue with this is the shape is incorrect. But, okay, we have that. We have that. Subsurface, you could even go a bit higher. I'm not gonna tell. And let's make this closer to white. And there you go. I mean, the rest of this is basically setting it up for render. The key insight here is I wanted to share Morian's, again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. I wanted to share Morian's kind of simulation trick for Softbody, speeding it up and then using geometry nodes later, which I thought was clever. And then also, how do you use this information in a way to extract, how do I get half of this shape to be one color, half of it another, add salt crystals, make it look like an edible food. And you could kind of play with this material a bit more to get it more where it needs to be. But either way, if anything, maybe we set this kind of more to a red color and desaturate it a bit, make it just a bit brighter. Yeah. Either way, that is the tutorial. How long have we been going? 18 minutes. You should have told me to stop. Either way, we're at the end of the tutorial, so you know what that means. It means I'm going to just take Patreon and shove it down your throat. But listen, there are something like 750 to 60 active patrons. They can't all be wrong. Why did they join Patreon? Why did they click the link in the description? Well, you get a lot in return. You get early access to tutorials. You could have seen this tutorial and pretty much every tutorial I upload a day or sometimes a full week earlier. So early access to tutorials, blend files. So I've uploaded hundreds of blend files at this point, years worth of Patreon. You can download any of those. And I'm going to see if I can get this one. I'm going to play with it, make it look better. But I'm going to see if I can get this blend file up there because I got to zip the simulation cache and all that. But in general, blend files. Also, exclusive tutorials. In the month of December, I have another one planned soon. But in the month of December, if you remember the Ritz video I did over on the CG Matter channel, I went through a full 40, 50-minute geometry nodes breakdown of that. That was pretty in-depth. So I do that every month, exclusive tutorials. But in general, if you want to support this channel, Default Cube, and CG Matter, Patreon is the way to do it. It's the easiest, it's the fastest, it's the most direct, and you get stuff in return. So if you want to do it, thank you. Freelance people, check out Morian. And yeah, that's the end of it. Thanks for watching.